Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. I'm David Gaylard, and I'm joined by my good friend Vik Vijay. Together, we discuss 40k and the meta from our perspective, along with events we've recently been to and those that have got coming up. So come on down to the fireside and listen.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of 40k Fireside. I'm Vik Vijay, and I'm joined by my co-host, David Gaylard. Thank you for coming back. And we have our similar kind of format to our podcast again. Our agenda is split into 3 parts. We're going to be going through a little introduction now, and then we're going to be talking about the largest event that's ever going to be held in Europe, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time, the London Grand Tournament. We're going to mix it up a little bit. There's a lot of coverage out there, and we're going to be picking out a number of lists that we find interesting that are coming to the event. And we're also going to be running through the list that we're going to be bringing to the event and the practice that we've been doing in the run-up to the event. The third part of the podcast is going to be a little bit more about the Leagues of Votann. Me and Dave have spent a bit of time thinking about what the potential counters and weaknesses of Leagues of Votann are. There is some talks about potential banning, so we'll be discussing that. But if they are to be released into the meta, hopefully we can share some thoughts on how you might be able to deal with them. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Dave to go through a little bit more.
And welcome back. For those people who have joined us the first couple of episodes, welcome back, and we really appreciate you coming back and listening to us. But if you're a new listener, then welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. You can find our podcast available on any of the major podcast platforms. Just search 40k Fireside, and we'll be right there. Now, we also want to give a big shout out to the Contact Lost podcast, where Vik and I last night had a chat with Tomek, and we had a really good discussion on all things being a top-tier competitive player, the stress that 40k brings, and our relationships with 40k as we've kind of grown as players. So if that's something you find interesting, go and check it out. And we'll give a big shout-out to our friends over at the StatCheck podcast with Anthony Vanella and Ernest there over as well. Now, without further ado, we'll go on to part 2. That wraps up part 1. We hope you're enjoying listening, and we'll be back shortly with part 2. Alright, everyone, welcome back to part 2. In this part, we're going to be chatting about our list that we're bringing to the London Grand Tournament, the biggest tournament in Europe, and the biggest 40k tournament in Europe to date, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. We're going to be chatting about a couple of lists that we picked out that we really like, and then we're also going to be chatting about our practice leading up to the lists. So without further ado, I'm David Gaylard. I'm going to be taking you through the list that I ended up landing on for my my tournament experience at LGT. So if you are familiar with me as a player, you probably know that I have in some ways kind of pioneered the High Fleet Leviathan Warrior. Some people call it a spam, some people call it a garnishing, some people call it a heavy dish. But that's still the same thing that I'm taking. So I'm taking a single battalion, High Fleet Leviathan, +1 to charge. And +1 to charge I still think is the best High Fleet adaptation, despite there being a pretty significant change to the 2-inch engagement rule. Now, the 2-inch engagement rule is a shame to lose if you're a tournament player, but +1 to charge is still really strong, instead of maybe the consideration of taking a 3-inch heroic engagement against Necrons, perhaps. But I've gone with +1 to charge because it's consistent and it's great in every single matchup. Then, I've got 2 Neurothropes. One of the Neurothropes is 5 model Obsec, so he's got the Alien Cunning Warlord trait. The other Neurothrope has direct guidance, so +1 to hit, and then I've got a bunch of spells on them. And I've got the Winged Flyrant with Reaper of Obliterax, of course, because why would you not play that? Then I've got 2 bricks of 9 warriors with as many cannons as possible. So I've got 1 with 3 cannons, 1 with 2 cannons, 1 with adrenal gland, both with adrenal glands, 1 with flesh hooks. The flesh hooks is on the 3 cannon squad. And then I've got a group of 4 warriors. Now I'll come to the discussion around points there in a second. Then I've got 3 Zone Thropes, 3 Tyrant Guard, 3 Venom Thropes, which is just standard, which you want in every list. And then I've also got 3 more Venom Thropes. So I got 2 units of 3 Venom Thropes. Then I've got 1 Harpy with Stranglethorn Cannons and Synaptic Link upgrade, and 1 Harpy with Heavy Venom Cannons this time around. So that's been the change that I've come up with for LGT. And those warrior changes, where I've dropped a warrior and I've dropped a cannon and 1 flesh hook, I think, is what's paying for the upgrade for me to get 3 Venom Thropes changing out something else as well, and then the heavy venom cannon upgrade for the harpies as well. Now, for the Synaptic Link upgrade, I decided to put that on the Stranglethorn Cannon Harpy, so if I outflank the Heavy Venom Cannon Harpy, it is still only cost me 1 CP. And if you're going to outflank one, that's the one you want to outflank so that you can shoot the turn it comes down with a larger impact as well. So that's the list I bring. I spent quite a bit of time toying around with lists and thinking about the meta after the Unconquerable event. And Vik and I played a game, and it didn't go so well for me on a list that was quite a bit different from what I was trying. And it really spun me into a bit of a head spin into just thinking about and stressing over what is the most optimal build. Should I be trying to innovate on a new list, perhaps? But, in the end, I ended up submitting a list that was very similar to something that I had played and had a lot of success with before, which is the double harpy, double warrior brick basic list. And the reason I did that is because I thought, how can I take that existing list and make some nuanced meta changes to it that will help me in the matchups that are now going to be prevalent and tough? Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest changes I made for that was changing heavy venom cannons onto one harpy. So previously I'd run them both Stranglethorn, but actually in the Necron matchup, having one of heavy venom cannon is, I found, very powerful against Necrons because it can target the destroyer unit, and even if they've got a 4-wound model or a 3-wound model with negative 3 AP, you can take out destroyers no matter what. So that's the big choice for that. Also being flat 4 is kind of nice against scarabs and anything else you want to shoot at. So that's the kind of list I've taken, and I think all in all I'm pretty happy with it, and I think it's definitely going to be something that'll be well within my wheelhouse, and I don't think I'll have any problems just evaluating the board state with that list.
I mean, just looking at it, if I was to come across from this, and I played this a lot, it looks extremely optimized to me. I think every single unit has a role and is an optimized choice with the points that are available for each one. I did want to discuss something with you because, I mean, we did have some practice and you were flexing around with a few different options, and the flex point sounded to me like you weren't completely sure if the harpies were correct for the meta. And I mean, maybe you could share some of your thoughts on why you thought that.
Which is great. I briefly touched on this in the previous episode, but in short, I thought that the meta was getting a lot more killy, and I think that going into a very large tournament, a lot of players were going to lean into a stronger shooting backbone list, which is kind of gives you a little bit more. It's a bit more safer style to play, right? If you have a strong shooting component back in, where you can make 4 rounds into the tournament quite commonly because you're going to just play chess and shoot down angles. And so I was worried about my harpies just having to constantly outflank them, playing CP, going down CP, and going into things like hammerheads, long strikes, even going into noise marines and the destroyer brick as well. But so I was kind of playing around with that 350 points, and one of the variants I tried out was this is when I played against Vik, was the Tyrannocyte drop pod with 3 pyrovores. And I basically played against Vik, and I knew it wasn't a good matchup for them. In that game, I was also dropped the Venom Thropes and the Tyrannid Prime to pay for a Walking Hive Tone. And the game didn't go well, and I still think that list was quite good. But what I realized was that during the game, there were so many things that I was learning, and this is the Friday before the Sunday of submission. So this is 2 days beforehand, and I just thought, to begin with, like, Pyroballs are not great in that matchup. They're really good against Necrons, for example. But at the end of the day, it came down to me not feeling comfortable with the list, in that I was learning way too much while I was playing that game, and I made larger strategic errors that if I was making those errors in round 6, 7, 8, 9, it would cost me the game. And so that was at the end of the deciding factor. But I was doing a lot of individual playtests during that time, and it was. There's definitely a lot of evidence to show that maybe not evidence, but I think one of the philosophies I have is that at the end of the day, if you're playing something you're comfortable in, that'll come through in your play in the game. And even if your list is 5% better, the mastery of knowing your list inside and out, like the back of your hand, is going to give you a bigger benefit overall.
Absolutely. And you actually touched on a really interesting point there about units and styles that you're comfortable with. And as soon as you deployed that army without the harpies there and with the huge number of pyrovores inside the drop pod, it didn't look as threatening to me because I know from playing you that your use of the harpies, you're so comfortable with either being patient with them, finding the right firing lines, finding the correct units to bomb over. They're such an integral kind of part of the way that you play that Tyranid list, that, yeah, it felt way less threatening when you drop them out the list. So
Yeah.
potentially that's kind of a playstyle thing as well. And a lot of people ask us what our playstyles are. We got asked that in the Contact Loss podcast, didn't we? And
Yeah.
maybe it's more just about whether or not you're comfortable with certain units and they fit the way you play the game.
Yeah, I also think for the list, actually, if you don't have the harpies, and I just realized this today when I was going for a walk, is that if you don't have the harpies, it makes your list um, defensive profiles completely one dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So your opponent has to just focus on killing things on the ground that are 3 up, 4 up save and have multiple wounds, right? But if you mix the harpy in, all of a sudden they have to think about, do I shoot the harpies with the stuff that is potentially good into the warriors? Do I shoot the warriors with the stuff that's maybe good into the harpies? And that actually creates a lot of problems for your opponent.
Mm.
And then the harpies go to that one turn with the 4 up and vulnerable, which makes calculations for your opponent quite difficult. So it adds a lot of multifaceted approaches to the list as well. And I'm really happy overall. I think I'm really happy with the list I played. So this is very similar to the list I won Leeds Super Major with, and I think actually having that second unit of Venom Thropes is just such a nice little chef's kiss to the Necrons matchup, because in the Necrons matchup, Venom Thropes are absolutely just absolute money. 15 attacks, poison 2 up, AP1 is exactly where you want to be.
Beautiful.
And fight last just makes them so hard to come into. So yeah, I'm liking them. And 10-inch movement as well, which is really good. Speed you want to be playing at for that matchup.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm happy with it.
Well, I'm planning on briefly touching on my list. We did take it in that practice game, and the list I used in the practice game against Dave is exactly identical to the list that I've submitted for both the LGT main event and also for the LGT Invitational.
So if you listen to the second episode, have you changed anything from your list from the GT that you won?
Yes, so I have a little bit because I was using some summoning points for some Chaos Demons, which is no longer allowed because the actual Chaos Demon Codex is released now.
Of course.
And the terrain setup is different. So I've dropped all of the special guns off my Terminators. I've dropped a Herald of Slanesh, and I've added in a second Venom Crawler. So we've got 5 Noise Marines, the 10 Terminators, 2 Venom Crawlers, Abaddon, and the 3 usual characters, which is Dark Apostle, Master of Possession, and my pick is Demon Prince as the last character, so I can do a Psychic Secondary. So so otherwise the list is unchanged. So it's the same core, and the second Venom Crawler. The Venom Crawlers work very well on UKTC terrain because the 12-inch movement is perfect to get angles. I was flexing between running Possessed, and I know I had been talking about it and saying the 5th unit of Noise Marines gets flexed into a unit of Possessed. I ended up deciding against it just because there was a little bit of tightness in terms of points. The Possessed unit is 140, the Noise Marine units are 135. I've squeezed in my last Noise Marine unit as 120 points with no Power Fist. So just that little bit of squeezing points means that I've dropped the Possessed and I've stuck with the 5 Blastmasters, because I think that kind of concentrated long-range firepower is quite integral for the way that I play this army. And I've got enough practice now that I'm comfortable playing with the 6 inches of movement. I can kind of do the role of the Possessed with proper positioning and deployment on most of these maps, just using a unit of Noise Marines. Sometimes I have to flex and use Honor the Prince on a Noise Marine unit rather than my Terminator unit to tuck them in behind terrain.
And remind me, what does Honor the Prince do?
Oh, sorry, that's the Auto 6 advance.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
So sometimes that 12-inch movement is needed just to tuck the Noise Marines in behind terrain on an objective just outside your deployment zone, which a unit of Possessed would be able to do just with a normal advance roll. So there's a bit of a compromise there, but I'm very happy with how this list has ended up. It feels like everything synergizes well and comes together. I don't know what you think, Dave. I mean, we've been through this quite a few times already.
Yeah, not to rehash, but I think it's a really strong list. What I would say is that actually reflecting on it now in the game that we played on Friday, your ability to play the list, I think, is dramatically improved from when you first, from like even the first 3 games I think you've played, because I think playing that big Terminator brick is not really like your style of playing, or hasn't really been your wheelhouse. And it's kind of similar to Tyrannid Warriors in a certain sense. You have to be willing to put them out there, understand the defensive profile versus your opponent's output profile, calculate ahead of time how much am I likely to lose, et cetera, in game. And that's quite, a lot of people think that's a very easy way to play Warhammer, just advance them out and do that. But it's actually quite difficult, especially in those big, intense games, to be willing to say, okay, I'm sure that this is a good move. This is where they're going, right in the middle. I'm committing, and your opponent has a potentially turn to just hammer everything into them. So I think, yeah, your movement has been significantly improving. Your deployment as well in the noise marines has been a lot better as well. And I think you've learned a lot of the auto tricks that I think a lot of people learn with armies of like, okay, you kind of, you do this every game. Like you wrap the character around the Terminators, can heroic fight last, and there are a lot of things like that that just make playing the games, you just get off to a much better start.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've learned the nuances of the list a little bit better. And actually, it's really interesting you say that, because you are right. I don't really play the very tough units in the middle of the board. I'm much more of a kind of a tricksy around the edge kind of player.
Yep.
But yeah, I've learned a lot with this. One thing it has made me realize, I have my weaknesses. I'm not very good sometimes at protecting fragile characters around the edges, but I've gotten a lot better with that because of this list. But one of my strengths usually when I play 40k is that I tend to be able to see a number of turns ahead, which has helped me to play a slow-moving army like this, which I didn't realize I could play a slow-moving army like with some proficiency. So I've really enjoyed this experience.
Yeah, and that list is quite similar to Tyranids in a lot of ways, right? Like warrior bricks function pretty similar to the Terminators. They're obviously a lot easier to kill, but they have a lot more threat in melee, and they're a little bit faster. And actually, the Tyranid backbone of shooting is even less so, much more than like that. So Tyranids is quite similar in that sense that you've got to be thinking, where are my angles where my warriors can get shot? Where is my opponent likely to be? Where do I need to go? Even if I'm getting shot off the board for 5 turns, how am I maximizing the points, and et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. No, it's a great list. I think you're gonna do great with it. And what I would point out is that actually what I said in the beginning of, I think a lot of players are gonna rely on a heavier shooting backbone. Very much came true when you talked about swapping out that possessed brick for the noise marine brick, right? It's
true.
comfortable, isn't it?
Very true. Yeah, the possessed would be much worse against you than another unit of Blastmasters. So
definitely, yep. Yeah, nice. So we've actually got a couple of people asked kind of what our practicing is like for the month. Like we actually talked about this in the Contact Loss podcast if you want to check that out. But just to recap from that, some of the big takeaways are that Vik and I probably play a lot less than what people think. Another high level point would being that we kind of both believe that practice is a formula best solved with quality over quantity, and actually having downtime from playing 40k is just as good as actually getting a whole lot of reps in. And then just to cover that off, Team Dice Down, my team, we have a practice day, small little RTT at one of our teammates' houses, and I'm playing that tomorrow. So I think I've got my first round is Malik Aman-Rubio, who's a fantastic player on our team. And then I've got Alex Pitford, who is another Team England player. And then I think I've got maybe George White in the afternoon as well, or in the evening. So that's kind of one of the benefits of being in a team, guys, is that you get an absolutely such a great quality of games in such a small amount of time, and we're really both blessed to be a part of a team that's just able to facilitate our 40k ambitions and stuff like that.
Absolutely, that's going to be amazing. And for example, I'm not there as well, but I'm going to be getting all the pictures and thoughts sent through to the WhatsApp group, and yeah, it's a massive benefit being able to have a team of like-minded players around you. So yeah, Dave, are you ready to kind of move on to some of the lists that we found interesting for LGT?
Of course. So the real meat and bones of part 2, apart from our obviously 2 completely top tier lists, I've got 2 honorable mentions. And the way that we selected these lists is I sort of looked at lists that I thought, you know what, if I was going to play, I would play something like that. So I've got a list here that maybe wouldn't maximize my chance of winning, but I've also got a list here that I thought was really good. Before that, though, I've got 2 honorable mentions. The first one is Innes Wilson, who's playing a variation on Eric from Australia's Gene Stealer Cult list. Now, this kind of list has been making the rounds, if I were to say so, in the kind of competitive scenes, in the social groups, chatting and whatnot like that. So this list has got a surprising amount of output, apparently. I haven't played against it. But Genestealer Cult actually has the ability to score quite well as well. So it's a very tricky list. I think Innes has got a great shot at LGT with it, particularly because he'll be well practiced with it, and people won't be practiced against him. Little do you know that I'm playing Malik Amun Rubio with Genestealer Cult tomorrow morning, though. So there's my practice. So I think that list is really good. I think that it could potentially struggle if someone catches it off guard and it really gets on the back foot early, though. So in a 9 round or in a 7, 8, 9 round tournament, that could potentially happen. And then the second list I've got is actually Kyle Grundy's list. You'll know him from Vanguard Tactics. He plays Tau a lot, and then is on the shortlist for Team England. Now, his list is basically, if I were to imagine a list for the honorable mentions that I didn't want to come across in the early rounds for sure, it's basically 2 Sunshark Bombers, 2 Riptides, 2 Devilfish with
Breaches,
with the breaches, and then 1 Crisis Squad suit. And the reason why I wouldn't want to come across this is because he's going to start both Sunshark Bombers on the board, and then go first, absolutely try and hammer you. And it's just, as Tyranids, it can be a little bit worrying if you have to deploy very defensively, and then you perhaps have to try and get into melee after that. So, yeah, I think that's a really good list. I think that list is going to catch people off guard with the output. But I actually think that there are some, I think Emperor's Children do really well into that, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Do really well into that.
I could give Kyle a game, for sure.
Oh, yeah. So let's hope that you hit him.
I mean, I love Kyle's list because it's a list after my heart. It's basically Tau, which are actually secretly Eldar in disguise, because the 2 Riptides and the Crisis Suit Bomb, essentially the plan is that he's going to be firing Fading with all 3 of those units and playing a very passive game via Kauyon. I would say that if you wanted to hear more about Kyle's list, Contact Lost did a podcast with Kyle and Dom Maidlow, which released on, where are we today? Friday morning. The Friday morning past before this podcast has been released. And Innes's list is briefly discussed in the previous Stat Check episode as well, if you guys wanted some more podcast content.
There you go. So that goes for the honorable mentions. We're going to dive into a couple lists now that we really enjoy, kind of unit by unit. Vik, do you want to start off?
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's a list, right? I love Yunari. I've read all the novels. My Yunkarn is one of my favorite models I own. And my good friend Ben Jones from Vanguard Tactics, who is a long-time tournament player, he's very very talented, successful player. He is bringing a Yunari list that he had some success with in a GT recently. I've got the list in front of me, and I'm just going to run through kind of the stuff in it. Now, I'm looking at it as an overview. It looks very similar to a list that Colin Sherman from Best in Tabletop now, I think it is. Best in Tabletop. Used to be Best in Faction, I think. It was running, but I actually like Ben's list more. I feel like it's got a few more tools. So starting the list off, he's got the Yin Khan in the list, and the Yin Khan is a unit which the list basically hinges around a little bit for a lot of its damage output. The Yin Khan ignores invulnerable saves and is a massive beat stick in combat and can essentially teleport to the position of where a unit has died, friendly or enemy. The whole of the Yunari army fights first, and the combination of these things can create some very interesting situations where if you try and charge multiple Yunari units, they're going to get a free interrupt. When something dies on your turn, the Yin Khan can teleport to that position and then be set up very aggressively for your opponent's Yunari turn. So the Yin Khan is the hinge point of the whole list. He's also got a couple of characters to help with some support. The first one's really interesting. It's an Autarch with does he have? Oh, he has Falcho's wing. So he has a relic for extra movement, I think, in order to save some points here. So he's got 12-inch movement with fly. He's got Ambush of Blades, which is a warlord trait, which is a command phase buff for an extra point of AP on one of your friendly units in melee. And that's a very important part of this list. He's got a Farseer with a couple of spells, the +1 CP spell, and I think that's potentially the reroll wounds in melee spell as well. So kind of Doom in melee. The Ambush of Blades syncs with the next major damage output point of this list, which is 2 big units of Harlequin troops. Ynnari allows for mixing of Craft World Harlequins and Drukhari as long as the ratio within each force organization slot is 1-to-1 with Craft World units to something else. So for every Craft World unit, he can have a Harlequin or a Drukhari unit. So in this case, he's got 2 units of Rangers to give him the Craft World tax to get his 2 units of 10 Harlequin troops. They're decked
Yep.
out with 9 weapons in the unit and no special guns. Essentially, what happens is that the troops get a load of buffs put onto them. They get the extra point of AP, they get full rerolls to wound, and the Autar can also allow them to reroll ones to hit. So
Mm.
that they hit very hard, much harder than actual normal Harlequin troops.
And wait, defensively, can you put anything on them as well, or?
Defensively, you can't, but there is a spell which allows you to heal D3 of them back, so you can
Oh, that's quite cool.
regen some of them, and obviously they're OBSEC. The only model that can cast that spell here is the Yin Khan, who knows the entire Ynnari discipline.
Mm.
Gosh, I haven't played a single game with Ynnari, but I'm so interested in them that I just know all their rules somehow. And then we've got a bunch of units from Craftworld Eldar. So I love these 3 units. These are 3 units that I think a lot of people will take. It's 2 units of Howling Banshees, Mirror Swords. One of them has Piercing Strikes for the extra point of damage on the Exarch, and then he has Crone Stream on the other unit. He hasn't taken the Nerve Shredding Shriek, which is the additional mortal wound on the second Howling Banshee unit, but I think that's probably to save some points. I would like to see that in the list, though. If he was to maybe make some tweaks, I'd probably drop a couple of weapons off of the troop units and give a second unit just to sacrifice, a second model to sacrifice in the unit. But Ben knows best. He's played this quite a lot. And then Striking Scorpions, he's got 1 unit of 5 with Biting Blades and Crushing Blows, which is the auto wound with the 7 attacks on the 2 damage weapon. They have exploding 6s to hit, so if you throw any 6s on your fate dice into that Striking Scorpion Exarch can suddenly end up with 6 or 7 auto wounds at 2 damage. So really
That
great
guy's
unit.
a beat stick.
He's a beat stick for the points.
He's a beat stick, yeah.
And then we've got 1 unit of Warlocks just with Quicken Restraint. I think that is potentially going to be to access some Psychic Secondaries, but hard to tell with the choice of Quicken Restraint there. Ben will know better. And then we've got 1 unit of Skyweavers, which is the Harlequin jet bikes, who are allowed to be taken because we have a unit of 6 Swooping Hawks. The Skyweavers are shooty, and I think that probably is the best loadout for the Harlequin bikes. So that's pretty nice. He has taken the Phoenix Plume on the Swooping Hawks as his second relic because he has nowhere else really to put it. Which just gives him a 5+ feel no pain on the Swooping Hawks. But it looks like as a unit of 6, potentially that might open up R&D, or I'm not entirely sure, but R&D might
R&D,
be the choice.
Sure.
And then he's got 2 units of 3 D cannons.
I was waiting for it. I was
the
going
D
to ask,
cannons coming. Yeah.
where are the support platforms?
So the support platforms can be played quite aggressively in Ynnari because the whole list plays aggressively. So you can essentially move them towards the middle of the board, threat saturate so that people can't really target them. And they provide some answers to threats like anti-tank and anti-terminator bricks, like what I'm bringing. The 2 units of 3 can do a lot of damage to those kinds of units, and he has to take some ranges as well. And there's a 1 CP strat that if an enemy unit is within 12 inches of a ranger unit, you can give full rerolls to hit to a platform unit that you have. So
really,
yeah, so really powerful
that's quite
synergy
good
there, especially because you might be throwing the ranges away in order to kind of mix up the teleportation of the Incarn. So yeah, I really like it. I think it's super cool. I think this is an extremely powerful list, and I think Ben is hopefully. I think it's very likely he's going to do very well, but I think he's going to have an incredibly fun time playing this as well.
Does sound like a fun list, and any list that has a Yinkan in it, even as a Biomass Tyranid player and AdMech chess player like myself, is pretty fun. It's pretty fun. The support platforms are pretty sweet as well. The one thing I would say about this list is that it really does not like aircraft.
Oh gosh, it hates the Harpy.
That's the only kind of like direct answer to a lot of the stuff that's pretty fast and can hide as well. But yeah, no, I mean a list like that is really fast, can hit hard, can take people off the off balance as well.
Absolutely. So, Dave, should we move on to your first choice of list?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dick Vanderhaast from Team Netherlands. Now, I think Dick has been around for quite a while. I apologize if your name's as you pronounce Richard, but yeah, so this is a Necrons list, guys, and I think in terms of Necrons, I'm sort of in two camps in terms of the lists that I would probably play at a tournament if I was going. Now, there's one camp which is basically 27 Scarabs, 15 Wraiths, 1x7 Destroy Brick, Barge, Silent King, and maybe something else, right? That's kind of like the most linear powerhouse functionality of the list. And then there's the other Necrons lists that take like Scorpic Destroyers, they take more smaller units of threes, and they don't necessarily take the big Destroyer brick. And then maybe they take some less Scarabs as well. So a little bit wider in terms of total unit count. And I think that's probably the way I would go with it. Simply because I think in the mirror, you want to be playing probably those smaller units because they're fast, a little bit less committal. And actually, yeah, that's kind of the approach that I like of it. So I'll just go through his list really quick. I'm probably going to mess some stuff up here, guys, because I don't play Necrons. But he's got Technomancer with the Veil of Darkness. He's got obviously the Silent King. He's got two Canoptic Plasma Sites, which I think is a really good reason to run the Scorpic Destroyers, if I'm not mistaken. They attach to a Destroyer unit. But guys, this is a 15-point OBSEC model that you can't target. Can't do actions, as to my knowledge, but that's pretty strong. It lets you just put a unit out there, can take an objective, and zero commitment, which is really strong. One unit of Canoptic Spiders, which I think is the kind of semi-melee beatstick guy. He's got 2 units of 3 Scorpic Destroyers. Oh, no, sorry. 2 units of 6 Scorpic Destroyers, 2 with the Reblade, 4 with the Thresher. So that's your kind of fast, hard-hitting melee component, as opposed to where some lists go more into Wraiths. I quite like the Scorpic Destroyers. They're a little bit slower, and Wraiths do have the 4-up invulnerable. But the Scorpic Destroyers do hit a little bit harder, so I couldn't fault players if they wanted to go either way, to be honest. But I do like having the 2 weapons, the 2 weapon options, obviously the Reblade being really powerful. It gives you a little bit, if you're good with math, you can optimize a lot better into targets. He's got 2 units of 3 Ophidian Destroyers. Now, these are kind of good simply because you can just go around. They're a lot faster. They have a worse armor save, but perhaps you can jump on people to trade up. But remember, all this stuff is OBSEC. Then he's got 1 Heavy Locust Destroyer. You can use the 1 CP auto wound on that. What else has he got? He's got 2 units of 9 Scarabs and 1 unit of 3. I personally like this combination of them. I feel like Necron, sometimes you go first. You want to have a unit of Scarabs that's not massive, that you can probably commit out, hold 2 objectives, across 2 objectives, and do the action. Now, what I would have liked to have seen is probably a unit of 9, a unit of 7, and a unit of 5 Scarabs. Now, the reason I say that is because at 5, you can get coherency for 2 inches, and I know for a fact that 5 inches, 5 Scarab models can probably hold most 2 objectives on UKTC. So if you go first, you hold 2 with your 5 Scarab unit, which I think is probably a good plan. And then you only lose 2 Scarabs of the 1 unit, so a unit of 9 going to 7 is not a huge deal. But, that's pretty small. And then we've got a big unit of, how many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I guess it's max. 9 Tomb Blades with the particle beamers. So I guess this is in place of the Destroyer brick that most players have been leaning into, the 1x7 Destroyers, for the full rerolls and full rerolls to hit and wound. Now, the particle beam is actually quite a good profile, and I think into opposing Necrons, it's a little bit less committal, and actually the profile's kind of just as good, so I really like that. And then he's got 2 more units of Tomb Blades, 3-man units with particle beamers as well. That's all good. And he's got 2 more Locust Heavy Destroyers. So this list has a total number of, drumroll, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 drops.
Oh boy.
I'm probably not even counting that right. It might even have 18. So, with your OBSEC capabilities in Necrons, I think that's kind of a cool way. And I think if you're a great player, it gives you a lot of play all the way across the board as well.
Oh, that's exciting. Dave, I have to ask you, with all of these different types of Necron lists, do you have one which you feel is the hardest for you to deal with if you were to come up against it?
The one that I is hardest to deal with for Tyranids is the list that the Australians took. Liam Hackett, I think, played, which is the list I talked about before, which is the 1 unit of massive destroyers,
Mhm.
3x9 scarabs, so 27 scarabs, 15 wraiths, and then a smattering of other stuff around that. The reason, because guys, I actually played that list on TTS against myself maybe 6 or 7 times, and I found I gave myself a really really good game. In fact, on some deployment missions, Necron's going first, I wasn't winning, and the reason that is because the scarab units soak mortal wounds really well. And actually, that destroyer brick. If you play that destroyer brick really well, and if you can shoot that destroyer brick for 3 turns, there's very little armies that can really combat that. So that is just a massive powerhouse of firepower that you can deliver for multiple turns, which is why, I did say I like the Tomb Blades with the particle beamers,
Mhm.
but I feel like Dick maybe could have consolidated one of the heavy destroyers and the big Tomb Blade into that 1x7 brick, so that he just has a massive fire piece. But yeah, it's so those lists are quite scary. And I think Necrons are just a fantastic army. I think these ones that have actually a larger amount of units are actually easier for Tyranids to play into, believe it or not.
Sure. Awesome. Okay. So that's really.
That covers that.
I mean, that's probably pretty useful for people because the most chosen army at the London Grand Tournament is Necrons, isn't it?
Yep, I believe so.
Yeah, I'm just like flicking through the roster and it's just like Necrons, Necrons everywhere.
Yeah,
So, yep, everyone's
there are a
in it
lot, guys.
to win it at this tournament.
All right, your turn. Your turn. What's the
Okay,
next list?
so I wanted to find a sisters list, and there were two sisters lists which really stood out to me. One was from Aidan Brocklehurst, and the other one was from Mitch. Mitch, what's Mitch's surname? Mitch Beard. I knew that. All right, Mitch Beard from the Sister Act podcast, and Aidan, who plays a lot of tournaments locally, and he has been on the Sister Act podcast. I'm going to go with Aidan's list because Mitch's list is quite similar to John Lennon's list with 2 units of 10 Retributors and a Castigator,
Mm,
and it's pretty standard, whereas Aidan is doing something a little bit different with his list. This is an army that he's taken to multiple tournaments, and he's kind of made his trademark by running 2 big units of Battle Sister squads.
mm.
Does he still have those? Yes, he does still have those. So he's got 2 units of 20 Battle Sisters, and
Wow.
yeah, I know, right? Wow. It's set in a Bloody Rose battalion, and he's one of the units has 4 Stormbolters. The Sister Stormbolters are damage 2, and they also give
Mm.
access to a stratagem to do mortal wounds on 6s, which cap.
Blessed bolts, is it?
Yeah, Blessed Bolt. So really useful way of accessing. I think it's 6 mortal wounds. I think.
Yeah,
Um,
6. Yeah.
and then the second unit has 2 multi-melters in it. So that adds to his multi-melter count, and he has 1 unit of Retributors to go with it as well, with 4 multi-melters. So that's a really interesting core to a list. The rest of the list is pretty standard. He's had to make some compromises on the Zephyrim and Repentia in order to do that. So the whole list reads as a Hospitaller, which is very important to give the 6 of Feel No Pain to the Battle Sisters and allow you to regen some of them, which can create some really nice movement interactions. We've got a Canoness with Rapturous Blow. Oh, Rapturous Blows, interesting. And Blazing Eye. So Rapturous Blows is the extra damage and strength on his weapon, on her weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because the Palatine. Okay, right. Got it. Right. So got Rapturous Blows in there with the Blessed Blade and the Chaplet of Sacrifice, which gives rerolls to hit and fight on death. And then Blazing Ire allows her to get an extra attack and advance and charge. So that's your beat stick Canoness, kept nice and cheap at 85 points. The
Mm-hmm.
Palatine has. Oh, interestingly, the Palatine also doesn't have the Word of the Emperor. So there's no fight lost in this list. Fair play. It's got Beacon of Fate, which allows her to do an extra act of fate just for herself, and that just shores up your secondaries there. Leap of Fate
Mm.
in particular. That's the one. And then the 2 units of Battle Sisters and 1 unit of Novitiates to round out the battalion. And then we've
Mm-hmm.
got a unit of Death Cult Assassins, Dogmata, Repentia Superior, and then 3 units of Repentia. These are relatively small. They're 854. And then we've got 2 units of Zephyrim, 1 unit of 8, 1 unit of 5, 1 unit of 5 Seraphim with Hand Flamers. We've got those multi-melter Retributors and a single Rhino alongside Morvenn Vol in a Supreme Command. So This is super interesting list, isn't it, Dave? It's
It's a lot different from what you normally see, and you never. I don't think I've ever seen 20 Battle Sisters uh, in a whole list, maybe. But certainly not on the board. Do you think 20 Battle Sisters is viable for walking? What do they do? Do they walk across the board? Do they sit on objectives, or what do you think? How would you play them?
Yeah, essentially they're a little bit CP hungry. There are a number of strats that you can use to improve their shooting output and also make them. I think it's really hard because I don't play big bricks of Battle Sisters, but there's a stratagem which makes them, I think, immune to morale and counters 2 models on objectives. So
It's quite nice.
yeah, so you can really make them fairly impressive for playing and holding the primary, which I think is one of the biggest weaknesses that sisters have.
Mm,
They have brilliant secondaries, but they're not actually able to survive long enough to hold the second objective on primary. So there's every chance that they go down to 4. There's also
yep.
been a little bit of an issue that Defend the Shrine is one of the sister secondaries, which is always taken. You pick an objective outside your deployment zone, and people are starting to realize as lists move to more aggressive threat saturation, get in your face kind of lists, especially the armies with worse secondaries, go for the shrine. Just run
Mm,
directly at it with the majority of your army, and
hmm.
sisters can struggle a little bit to hold on to that shrine and control the primary there.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes that turns from a 12 into a 6 really quick. Because
yeah,
they lose points at the end of the game. Guys, if you don't know this, you attack the shrine and they lose points at the end of the game. If you hold it at the end of the game, they lose 3 points, if I'm not correct.
yep, absolutely. And I like the approach of going a bit heavier on these units that are planning to hold the primary in UKTC terrain, where there are firing lines which can pick up some of these small skirmishing units. So
Hmm.
I like that I think his list sits very well for this particular type of meta and this particular type of terrain set. So I think Aiden's got a good chance here. And the fact that Mitch has also gone for kind of 2 big units of Retributors really says that that probably is the right direction to be going with sisters if you want to compete in UKTC. So
Mm.
I really hope that these two do very well. They're both lovely people. And I think Aiden has done an interview about pretty much this list on the Sister Act podcast. If you guys wanted to check that out, they're really good. Um, so
Go
yeah,
take your faith over there.
yeah, absolutely, yes.
All right,
Over to
enough of the
you.
faith. Enough of the faith. We're taking it demonic. All right, guys. So on to my second list. Now, I've been playing and messing around with Chaos Demons for a while, and I actually found a list that has the very logic that I actually came to. So naturally, I thought that this list was kind of a really good idea. Now, this is by a guy called Will Whitaker, who I played. I think I've played him twice. Once at the London Open, and then another time at Goonhammer. This guy is a very sharp player. I remember he had a very complicated Tau sequence in terms of attacking my Tyranid army, in terms of a very complicated firing sequence, and this guy nailed everything. So trust me, when someone does that to me and I go, wow, you lined up everything correctly, you made all the decisions that I would have made with my firing and damage allocation, which as a player I think one of my strengths. That impresses me, especially with an army kind of as complicated as Tal. So naturally I was keen to see what he was playing, and I was pleased to see that he landed on something very similar to what I would land on. So I'm gonna run you through it now. It has Big Belly Boy, Big Bellicle, which I think is at this point just an auto include in Chaos Demons. The reason he's an auto include is because he gives your mixed battalion units access to all of the Warp Storm, because you've got a pure detachment of like Slanesh, Korn, Nurgle, Zinch, and stuff like that, because he's the only model in that, and he has all of the icons. He's also got the Warp Locust keyword, so you zap him all your stuff down to him. And then also he's got the very important teleportability, which is the Shrouded Step, which allows the next part of your army, your 3x6 flamers, to bounce around the board. So Balakor turns on your flamers a lot. Obviously, you can deep strike through the demonic keywords. But if you start one on the board, you can teleport them as well, because you need to start some stuff on the board. And the only problem is he's not super reliable at casting. So that's kind of the one feels bad about the list, is that there's no way to make Balakor just more reliable caster, which is a bit of a shame. So he's got 3x6 flamers. He's got an Exalted Flamer, which is another character, which I'll get to in a bit. And then for troops, he's gone with 50 bloodletters. Now, I think that this is the exact way that you should go with Chaos Demons, because Chaos Demons are easy to pick up after the fact. And it doesn't matter if you're playing Blood Crushers, like even Nurgle is easy to kill as soon as it's on the battlefield, which is just thematically really bizarre. Like, it doesn't feel like Nurgle things are any tougher than anything else, which I think is a bit of a miss by Games Workshop. But then he's also got 3 Nurglings as well. So the Nurglings allow you to play around and get into nooks and crannies and potentially take engage on all fronts if you really want to do that. But you're probably going to be taking the demonic one for that though. But they allow you just to sit back and then hold stuff. So that's a cheap 60-point unit. And sorry, back to Bloodletters. If you have 5 units of them, you can kind of explode on one turn, and then your opponent, and then get around to nooks and crannies, and then you can use the Khorne Warpstorm power to prevent people from falling back. And now demons are particularly easy to kill in shooting, so if you can prevent a lot of stuff from falling back, that makes it a lot easier. So I think Bloodletters are good. I actually just think Bloodletters are probably the best troop in the book because they actually just hit hard enough, whereas like Slaanesh Demonettes, even obviously the Nurgle stuff doesn't hit hard, obviously the Tzeentch stuff doesn't hit hard. So they're the kind of ones that you want to lean into as your primary damage output. Then he's gone for a change caster. So he's got Impossible Robe on the change caster, which is interesting. I don't know if I would have gone with the relic on that one because I feel like you could probably protect him. But I mean, Impossible Robe is great anyway, so you can't fault him for that. And he's got a Fate Skimmer as well. And Fate Skimmer is great, guys, because it's quite a relevant melee component as well. And he's actually you can character protect him in addition to that. So 150 points, you are paying a bit for him, but you do get quite a bit out from him if you can use him throughout the whole game. And then he's got a Skull Taker as well. Now, I think the Khorne characters are really what you're looking for as well. Khorne characters, to me, are another unit in your troop slot because you can basically, drop your Khorne character in. He's going to take out probably a unit by himself, maybe, and then prevent the fallback as well. So instead of Bloodletters, you get to run a little character, and he can buff the Khorne stuff as well. So, yeah, I think this list is really cool. I don't think I would change much at all. In fact, if I was going to next time I'm going to play demons, I'm going to play exactly this list. It seems really fun, and oh man, I want demons to do well so bad.
No, it seems extremely strong. Dave, you know the 5 flamers in each unit is
6.
Oh, because I'm reading it wrong. Got
it's
it.
It's a pyrocaster. Hey.
Of course. Okay, no, that feels this feels extremely optimal. I love that he swapped the Big Bird for the Changecaster plus Fate Skimmer. I think that's absolutely correct.
Yep, he has basically swapped Big Bird for Fate Skimmer and Skull Taker, which is basically, you get that. I think I would go with the second Khorne character, or I would potentially drop the Exalted Flamer, the Fate Skimmer, and the Skull Taker, and get a phase-capped Bloodthirster.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
That's basically what I would go for, yeah. Because I've been chatting with a couple of people, and actually, I think the phase-capped Bloodthirster is actually a good option because it is quite tough to get through. It's quite hard for your opponents to allocate damage into it because you get a 5 at Feel No Pain, and it can only take a maximum of 8. So you have to do about 13 wounds to it on average. And so, yeah, and sometimes you just don't do 13, right? And then all of a sudden, if you didn't deal 8, he's even harder to deal with. And it's just the big, okay, you got to deal with this, right? Which I think demons that's the element that they're missing in a lot of ways. So maybe cut some Nurglings, Exalted Flamer, cut the Fate Skimmer. That gives you a phase cap Bloodthirster. And then you've got the Relic Stratagem that you can put something on him as well. He's also got Warlord trait. He's got the Warlord trait on Be'lakor as well, which, I think you could... I think you actually have to give him the Warlord trait off the top of my head. So, yeah, that would be that's the change I would make. But look, I think this is a really cool list. I would be, I'm kind of jealous because I think this list is it looks really fun to play.
You should have brought this, Dave.
I'm trying to win.
Okay,
but,
should we go? Okay, so I've changed my mind on the next list I wanted to talk about. Because I was planning on talking about Dan Bates' list from Glasshammer, who's playing a really interesting Eldar list, but we're going to be talking a little bit about counters to Eldar list, counters to Leagues of Votann in the next section, and it kind of overlaps a little bit. So I'm going to do another list, which I think is probably a better Chaos Space Marine list than my one.
Ooh, this is big talk, guys. Big talk.
So this is from Lewis Fitzsimmons, who is I've known Lewis for ages, and actually the only ever doubles tournament I've played with Lewis as my partner a number of years back. So me and Lewis go way back, and we've been chatting loads about Chaos Space Marines, and I've always been on the Emperor's Children side, and he's been on the Creations of Bile side. And I think
That seems to be the two big camps that anyone has landed in, right? You don't really see anything else apart from those two as well.
yeah, well, yeah, you say that, but I think the Emperor's Children fall in the level of popularity of all the other sub-factions, but the Creations
Yeah,
of
you're right.
Bile have moved way ahead as statistically, obviously, the strongest sub-faction.
Mhm.
And there's loads of factors to this. Creations of Bile have an incredible Legion trait where they get +1 move and +1
Mhm.
strength. They have a stratagem for a core unit to advance and charge. This is already sounding like big money, but on top of
Yep.
that, the whole army fights on death. So it's a very, very strong combination. On top of
And they
that,
get a secondary as well.
yeah, they have an amazing
Yep.
secondary where they get 3 points if they kill a character or a monster in melee, and 2 points for any other unit excluding vehicle units in melee. So that is a very, very good secondary for an army which is going to be primarily melee based.
Mm.
Lewis's list has been up. He won a GT in St. Albans a few weeks back, and he's made some optimizations to his list, which I really like. I think he's really nailed it here. I'm just going to run through the list here. So he's got a battalion in the Supreme Command. So he has got Abaddon in the Supreme Command without his warlord traits. And then in the battalion, he's got 3 characters. Now, previously, he had 2 Lord Discordants and a Demon Prince. Now he has a Demon Prince, a Dark Apostle, and a Lord Discordant. The Demon Prince is incredibly good. So there are some sub factions which are locked to certain Chaos Gods, like Emperor's Children is locked to Slanesh. Creations of Bile isn't locked, so you can get relics and marks and abilities from any of the Chaos Gods. So this Demon Prince is the best Demon Prince, in my opinion. It is one with the Mark of Nurgle and the Nurgle Chaos Demon weapon, which allows him to ignore phase caps and auto wound when he hits, which is insanity on a three.
That's kind of what you want if your opponent's playing Abaddon.
Yeah, it's really really good into a lot of the meta at the moment. He also has Twisted Regeneration, which is a very very good warlord trait, which means that the first time that he dies on a 2+, he comes back alive at the end of the phase as close as possible to where he died.
I hate stuff like that, by the way. Oh my god, that stuff is so annoying.
And yeah, it's really tough to deal with. Now that doesn't combine with Fight on Death, so if he uses that to get back up at the end of the phase, he can't Fight on Death.
Mm.
That's how that works. He has a spell Diabolic Strength, which is quite relevant, and this is one of 2 sources of Diabolic Strength in his army. That spell is plus 1 attack and plus 2 strength for a single infantry model. He has a
Mm.
Dark Apostle with the Trans Hitman that can only be hit on 4s and no hit rerolls on a friendly unit litany. And then he's got a Lord Discordant. This Lord Discordant is epic. The Lord Discordant has the Mark of Slanesh, which means that he can fight first. And he has Flames of Spite, which allows him to reroll all wounds. And any 6s to wound on melee or shooting is a mortal wound in addition. And then has the Intoxicating Elixir, which essentially gives him a phase cap once per game in the melee phase where he can only take 3 wounds, 1 use
What?
only. Oh yeah, Intoxicating Elixir. So that's why he's gone Marcus Slanesh to get access to that relic.
I was going to say, Slaanesh doesn't seem like the one you want on an army that fights on death, but man, being face capped once per turn, that's pretty
Once per
sweet.
game, yeah.
Once per game, yeah.
And it also, the turn that he activates that and gets the face cap, he gets plus D3 attacks as well. So real
What?
serious beat stick. And Creations of Bile have the big thing where they put the Lord Discordant at the breakpoint of Strength 8, which is very, very important for
Mm.
things like killing knights.
Yep. Strength 8's really good to be at the moment.
Yeah, he's interestingly in his previous list, he really loved the legionaries with the Mark of Corn, but he's dropped all of those now. There's none of those left. He's got 1 unit of legionaries, and they've got the Mark of Slanesh and a missile launcher in the unit. They've got a Balefire Tome, which makes them into a Psyker unit, and they have the Diabolic Strength. And there's a lot of tech here because the Mark of Slanesh gives them access to a stratagem which allows them to turn 1 hit roll, wound roll, or damage roll into a 6. The missile launcher gives them access to a strat where if they score a hit, they do 2d3 mortal wounds. So you have a little bit of synergy there with that.
A little bit of combo
A
there.
little bit
I
of
like that.
counter on flyers. I'm not sure how LGT's ruled it, but Raw, the wording is that if on the first turn you roll a 6 to hit, you will get exploding hits and you essentially would do 4d3 mortal wounds. But different TOs have ruled that differently. So I'm not sure what the deal is
Something
with
to
that.
watch out for. Guys, if you're playing against your opponent, ask them if they've got that combo. That sounds dirty.
Yeah,
What?
the cheeky 4d3
Wow.
mortal wounds can come out of nowhere.
I'm going to be watching out for that one.
And then Diabolic Strength is important because he has 2 big bricks of Chosen in this army.
Right.
Now, one of the bricks is your usual brick that you tend to see. So Creations of Baal tend to prefer Chosen over Terminators because they're a bit more points efficient. And also the Chosen hit a nice kind of break point with the additional point of strength from Creations of Baal. They just work quite well. So
does it put them up to strength 6?
yeah, it puts them up to strength 6.
Oh, that's nice.
Also, Chosen have access to the Chaos Icon, which Terminators don't. So when they have the Mark of Slanesh, they can get +1 to hit. So the defensive unit has the Mark of Slanesh. So it's a big unit of 10 with the Rune of Damnation, which makes them -1 to be wounded. So I'm guessing this is his defensive unit, which goes through to the middle of the board and essentially screens his characters for as long as possible. With the threat saturation there, probably they'll be okay to survive a turn or two, even against very strong shooting armies. And then the second brick is Mark of Khorne, which gives them another point of strength. So they're going up to strength 7 now, which is quite nasty. And then the Chaos Icon in that unit takes their power swords up to AP -4. So this is his beat stick unit. And in that, he's given the champion a relic called the Black Mace, which is a 3 damage weapon that spills over any excess damage that it does. So if you get 4 wounds through, it does 12 damage. It can kill 12 1-wound models.
Yeah, really good. Spill damage is so powerful.
And he's using that alongside Diabolic Strength, which gives an extra attack and +2 strength to that. So I think it takes it to like strength 8, which is quite nasty.
Can he, is that the one where he can put the additional attacks like on that 1 infantry model with the spell?
I think previously he had this on a unit of Chaos Bikers, but I think what it was is Diabolic Strength syncs up quite nicely with this, and that can only be done on an infantry model. So, 2 units of 5 Possessed who are amazing in Creations of Baal. They're just very, very efficient for what they do, and the fight on death really, really makes them much better. A small unit of Chaos Bikers with Mark of Khorne and Chaos Icon, so they've got the AP -2 chainswords. It's a unit of 4. Nice. And in the troop slot, he's got 2 units of Cultists and 1 unit of Accursed Cultists. Have you seen Accursed Cultists before, Dave?
No.
Okay, so these guys have just been released. They were released a little bit after the initial Chaos Space Marine release. They're 75 points, and they come with 8 models. They come with 3 kind of Chaos spawns in the unit and 5 little, like, cultist models. The cultist models are immune. When they die, they don't count towards morale. And in each of your command phases, you can bring 3 of the little models back or 1 of the big models back. So there are some maps in the UKTC terrain where the objectives sit just outside of your terrain piece. And what you can do is just put 1 model out onto that objective, rest of the unit behind terrain. And when you shoot that unit, you have to kill the entire unit, because if you don't, in your command phase, before you score your primary points, they'll just pop 3 more models back onto that objective. So very strong control piece for the primary here, which in this list, he has a relatively small number of units, is quite important.
I was going to say, it seems, so the only thing that I like this list, and the tech pieces you described seem really good. The only thing I'd be worried about playing this list is it seems like you have to funnel your army a little bit too much in terms of your Disco Lord and Abaddon can be picked off if you're not really sharp, and your Possessed Bomb do have not Possessed Bomb. Your Possessed
Chosen.
do have Chosen. Sorry, your Chosen do have quite a big footprint, so it does telegraph what your game plan is quite early, in my opinion.
I think there's going to be a turn where he puts the entire army in the middle of the board, and that's your turn. That's the turn where you will make or break whether you win the game. And I think if you have enough shooting output and you've planned your positioning one turn earlier correctly, you could give this list some problems. I think it does suffer to very, very heavy shooting.
I think also a lot of people don't sometimes understand that you can move backwards in that you don't always have to move forwards. You can move deeper into your deployment zone sometimes if it's going to prevent a lot of things from happening. I think this is I was going to get into this bit, so I'll jump into it. This is what I think the biggest difference between Empress Chosen and Creations of Bile are. I think that Empress Chosen is a better all-round list because it allows you the opportunity to not be outplayed by those really top-end players. Because someone like myself looks at a list like Creations of Bile, and I go, okay, I've played against this once or twice. I know what's going on. When you zig, I can zag very easy because I know exactly. I can tell your army's kind of telegraphing where it wants to go, and I can kind of duck and weave, and then I can shoot you, mortal wound you enough until I'm ready to engage on my own terms. So Empress Chosen gets around that a lot by having a very key threat within the Terminator bricks, and then it has shooting as well. So you can't just play ring around the rosy with an army like that. Absolutely. That's why I like Empress Chosen a bit more.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I think if people wanted to do well in tournaments, I think you're probably going to have a better chance doing well with a list like what Lewis is bringing than a list like what I'm bringing. But
Definitely.
You're completely right that having a heavy shooting element to a combat army is really powerful in games where you're playing against very good players. And Emperor's Children definitely do that in a way that Creations of Bile cannot. But Creations of Bile score better. They auto-win melee matchups, and they're chunky enough with really powerful characters behind it that you can kind of just move to the middle of the board and then kill them the next turn.
That Disco Lord seems pretty nutty, and we all know Abaddon, like, when he gets in combat, is really good as well. By the way, because I'm an idiot, can you put Abaddon into Advance and Charge in that army?
Yes, you can. So
you can still do it, right?
Yeah,
so you can still get Advance and Charge.
Per game.
Yeah, super nice. And other than that, he's pretty well protected because even if the Fly Rank comes in, you can fight on death as well, which is... Abaddon doesn't kills with Fly Rank on average, especially if you have Catalyst on him. But, I mean, he does do a fair chunk of damage.
So he's still Black Legion, so he's still got to use that stratagem to switch to a different Legion preemptively.
Of course.
So, that's a big skill play. Timing the switch to a different Legion is the biggest challenge with using Abaddon. So for people who don't know and who are running Abaddon, right, I'm sure most people know, he's in a Black Legion detachment, so he gains access to the Black Legion stratagems. The only relevant one in there is switching him to a different Legion. And there are 3 legions that you can switch him to. One, which I think makes sense. The most important one is Red Corsairs, which allows him to advance and charge. The second most important one is Creations of Bile, which gives +1 move, strength, and fight on death. And the third one is Alpha Legion, which lets him fall back and charge. And you can only use that stratagem once in a game. So you've got to be super careful and super conscious of your plan with him. And the skill usage of Abaddon is make or break for these chaos lists. And I'm excited.
Especially against turns. Turns as well, because if you put him into Creations of Bile, then I can't put the Flyer in maybe, or if you put him in Red Corsairs, I might put the Flyer in, and Flyer outranges Abaddon easy, so that's a really key thing to understand. But that's only one matchup. Well, there's that Demon Prince that ignores phase caps, but
watch out for him.
Yeah. All right, so that's the kind of 8 lists that we thought were really fun. We thought these lists were were strong, but also lists that we would like to go and play and would be fine with submitting as well, and kind of lists that we thought could cause a bit of trouble if they catch you off guard as well. In terms of our lists, Vic, how are you feeling out of 10 on your submission? Is there anything you were backtracking at the moment, or you're like, I wish I'd done this or done that?
No, I make 0 tweaks to my list. As far as Emperor's Children go, I'm really happy with this list.
Yeah, I don't think your list has much room for flexing, and I think the 2 Venom Crawlers is a really nice pick, and they're actually a pain to remove. So, pro tip, if you're playing against them, don't try and remove them because they just got 5 up and runnable. They're T7 guys, they're not T6 as well, so they're harder to kill. They're like 12 wounds or something. I don't know. They're way too technical.
What about your list, Dave? What do you think?
You know what? You know that I was going through some ups and downs. You don't know the full extent of it, but I was really back in the. I was deep in the tank. I was trying all kinds of stuff, guys. But I'm really happy with how I landed it, and I'm really happy because of the statistics that have come out in terms of what people are playing. I think that the second unit of Venom Thropes is just, I'm really happy with it. The one Harpy with the Venom Cannons just gives me the opportunity to go, if this matchup's really looking bad, I can start both of them on the board. And you know what? If I go first, then I'm going to be in a really great position. And having access to that is something your opponent's always going to be like, well, if he goes first with this heavy venom cannon harpy, I'm in a bit of trouble. And there's playing lists that have that capability are very strong in a tournament setting where you need to win a small amount of games at the very last parts of the tournament. There's always some worthwhileness to having a list that does stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, so that's been the 8 lists. 2 of us included our own lists, and hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you in a little bit, and we'll get on to part 3, where we're going to be talking about the Leagues of Votann, potentially some counters to them, how Vik gave me a little bit of a lesson when we played, and we'll see you guys in a little bit. And that concludes part 2. We hope you're enjoying the Fireside, and we'll see you momentarily for part 3.
Welcome back to part 3, and in this part, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Leagues of Votann. I think I made a rant everywhere. The rants are coming to me naturally, but it's time for me to be positive and try and think realistically about what we can do to deal with Votann. They're an incredibly strong army. I mean, in my opinion, they're clearly overpowered, and I'm sure Dave's as well. And I think a lot of the community is starting to see that as well. But there are a few things that they can't do. I think I sat down and I looked at all the armies I have, and I thought, what can I create to tailor against what I feel is the initial kind of optimized Votann list, which at the moment I've got in my head is the one that we ran in the test game. So, Dave, do you remember what you were running exactly?
Yeah, so it was the Classico, which is the Grimnir, who's the Psyker, the Carl, the Forge Master, of course, with the upgrade, 3 Hecaton Land Fortress with all beams, a unit of 6 Pioneers with 2 beams, a unit of 6 Pioneers with 2 beams, a unit of 3 Pioneers with 1 beam, 3 lots of Hearthkin Warrior, the troops, 3 units of 10 troops, and then 1 unit of 5 Berserkers.
Perfect.
That's off the top of my head. I don't think I forgot anything.
I think that's
there's not much to it, guys.
Yeah, just take the best ones as many times as possible. So I put it down. Dave, look, run this list. I'm going to find something to beat this list. Now, if we look at a faction as a whole, there are a few things that Leagues of Votann have that could be considered as weaknesses. So first of all is, okay, actually they have quite a few. They do have a few. So first of all is that the non-land fortress units have at best a 4-up armor save. So they don't start at a 3-up armor of contempt save. The next weakness is outside the Hearthkin Pioneers, which are the jet bikes. The rest of the army cannot fly. The next one is that they have no access to flyers or any significant indirect fire. So these were the things that I worked around, and I thought, okay, what can I do to play this? And I came up with an Eldar list that is extremely tailored. It's tailored to the point where I don't even run Doom in the list. That's how tailored we're going. And
Vic's basically opening up his own suit shop at this point, guys. He is the tailor.
So this list has it's a custom craft world. I've gone for Masterful Shots, which is ignore cover, and I think ignore cover is extremely powerful because the Hearthkin warriors, with not being able to get a cover save, it opens up the ability for you to use a lot of AP0 weaponry. Which can be really efficient at killing them, to be honest. And then the second one, I've gone for Swift Strikes. Now, in a lot of European tournaments, including UKTC and WTC, Swift Strikes is a subfaction trait which allows you to advance and then count as remaining stationary in the shooting phase. WTC and UKTC have ruled that that means that you can battle focus after advancing. So essentially, the concept of the list is put loads of swooping hawks in the list, jump out and shoot the bikes and the Hearthkin warriors. Objective number 2, put units on the board which I can move block Dave with. And then essentially try to survive long enough that Dave can't get out of his deployment zone and score any primary. I wasn't sure if I would actually be able to kill him, but maybe I can if I really tailor the weapon profiles to it. So let me read through the list here, and then I'll let Dave kind of chime in a little bit. So I have a suite of characters, which are all psychers. So I have 2 Farseer Skyrunners. One of them is purely set up to do Mortal Wounds. Again, Mortal Wounds, amazing against Votann. So he's got Crushing Orb, which is roll 3 dice. Any 4 pluses does a Mortal Wound. If it's a vehicle or a monster, it's a 2+ rather than a 4+. And then I've got Executioner, D3 Mortal Wounds, another D3 if I kill a model. Doesn't need line of sight on that one. And doesn't need line of sight. Crushing Orb, you pick target, Execution is closest. The second Farseer Skyrunner was a defensive one, so had Guide and Will of Asaurian. And then we had a Warlock Skyrunner with Protect and Jinx, and was also set up to go and do actions if needed. And then 2 little Warlocks with Quick and Restrain in case I needed to send off the Mortal Wound Farseer, bounce him back, or the do an action and bounce a character back. I've also had Baharoth in the list, who's just always quality. 5 Rangers, and then I had a unit of 10 Dire Avengers, a unit of 5 Howling Banshees with the Mortal Wound Mask and Mirror Sword's Piercing Strike, a unit of 5 Striking Scorpions with the 2 damage auto wounding thing, which is amazing against Votann. And then I had a unit of Shining Spears with Paragon Saber, Mortal Wounds. I took the Mortal Wound Relic, the Kane's Lance, 4+ D3 Mortal Wounds, make an opponent fight last. A unit of Shroud Runners, which gives they have a pre-game move and they're on nice big chunky bases. They are the big piece of tech against Votann because they have a stratagem where you can, at the start of your opponent's movement phase, pick an enemy unit and they can lose D3 inches of movement. The land fortresses do not fly, so you can move block potentially 2 land fortresses down an angle, and then the 3rd land fortress, you can reduce their movement and stop them from getting to any meaningful position just with 1 unit of Shroud Runners, which is super strong. And then I had 2 big units of 10 Swooping Hawks. Again, the Mortal Wound theme here. With Swift Strikes, they can auto-advance 6 using the Strands of Fate dice. If they fly over something, they can do roll 10 dice. Any 4+ is a Mortal Wound. And then we had 3 Vipers, I think 3, maybe, 3 Vipers and a big unit of, a moderate-sized unit of Warp Spiders. I think it was 8 man. Warp Spiders have an exile power called Web of Deceit, which allows them to battle focus like a Swooping Hawk unit once per game. The profile is excellent. It's strength 6, which pushes above the T5 of the jet bikes, and -2 AP, which is great with Ignore Cover, which is pushing everything up to that 5-up invuln that Ymir has. And then we had just a Wave Serpent with some Scatter Lasers. So Scatter Lasers are brilliant. It's on all of the Vipers and the Wave Serpent. Strength 6, no AP is a fantastic profile into Votann. That was the list, man. I mean, I set it up just for a couple more things, which I didn't mention at the start. One is being able to kill the troops with the weight of fire, and the other one is if there's a land fortress forward close enough for me to move 20 inches with the Swooping Hawks, I can do 5 Mortal Wounds there, a bunch of Mortal Wounds in the Psychic phase, and then a bunch of Mortal Wounds in the combat phase. So I can actually one-tap a land fortress with this list. Yeah, and we had a game, Dave. What did you think?
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say is that Leagues of Votann are possibly the most boring army to play in the whole game. All right, that's my rant over. Yeah, so we played, and I thought I would be big brain and outflank my Hickerton land fortresses. So the game we played was Vik's pick of mission. Vik can go first, pick whatever second, et cetera, et cetera. So literally, ideal circumstances. I went big brain and thought, I'm going to outflank my Hickerton land fortress. I'm going to get him here. I'm going to get him, outflank him, and then I'll be able to get around the board a lot easier with them. What I realized is that actually Vik pinned me in so fast that he was able to pin my army and pick up my 6 pioneers, I want to say, because their footprint's actually quite big. And then actually I had no hope in the game after that. Now, what I would say is that if we played it a bit better, what I should have done is I was when you get these thoughts in your head, you're like, oh, the best way to play this army is clearly just to put your land fortresses on the line. But this one time I might try and mix it up. No, there's a reason that's the best way to play. It's because they can't kill. No one can kill land fortresses. Well, they can kill them, but it's so hard. And if you start them more towards the back of the board, you're just going to be locked out of the game. And actually, that's what Vik managed to do really well. Is just completely isolate my land fortresses out of the game, so that I couldn't move them forward. I was really struggling. And then, of course, he just super smites me for 6 mortal wounds. Look, I think an army that like Eldari is. What I would say is, playing against Eldari in that type of list when you don't have an aircraft is the most unfun thing in the world. Because the whole army just moves out, shoots you, bounces back out, does all the bunch of stuff. It's just dancing around the board, and you're left there looking like an idiot.
Yeah.
What I think would happen is if I did put the land fortresses on the board, it would be probably a very even game. I still think that Vik's list could probably beat Leagues of Votann if it went first. And my land fortresses were on the line. It would be closer, but I think you could still hem me in. And actually, the Swooping Hawks being able to just do mortal wounds to land fortresses is really powerful. But the larger point is you just try and make sure the land fortresses can't activate, and you shoot everything else off the board, which is what your list was obviously fantastic at doing. And that was kind of under ideal circumstances, guys.
Yeah.
So the adjustments that I think I would make to that Votann list are, what I would do is I would actually drop the Psyker. I would drop the Grimere, and I would drop 3 bikes, and I think that probably gives me enough points for 5 Terminators. Now, I think 5 Terminators, they're not the most optimal choice, but what they do is they allow you to have a little bit of dynamic play, because you can put the, is it the Warp Shrike relic on them, which gives them the free once per game teleport, which is really what you will find you'll need if you want to dig yourself out of holes. Like, if I had 5 Terminators with, I don't know what guns, like Volkites, something like that, right? I don't know, can they take comms in the Terminators?
No, they can't take that, or scanners.
Okay, so 5 Terminators still hitting on 3s with Volkites would just allow me to dig myself out of situations like that, and then have counterplay on the rest of the board. So I think that's really what you're going to want. And actually, not taking the Grimere is not losing much at all. Like, sure, you don't get access to that secondary for Psychic, but you also get to take Abhor the Witch, which for an army that's just going to try and kill everything is actually a pretty relevant psychic power at this point in the game as well. So
yeah,
I think that's perhaps the direction I would take the list, but it is beatable if you tailor absolutely everything to it, yeah.
So I played another test game afterwards with our teammate Jim. And I actually added in the Terminator squad. I'm a big fan of the Terminator squad.
Great minds think alike. I didn't know that before.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to tell you about that because that's really rough to deal with. So
by the way, guys, I agreed to play this game at 8:30 in the fucking morning, and it didn't even tell me.
That's my moment of most strength and Dave's biggest weakness.
Guys, this is like the worst game I've ever played in my life too. I was so bored. Like, I think Vik can obviously tell. Like, turn 1, I was just like, I've messed everything up. This army is so boring. Like, Vik's just dancing around the board, having the time of his life.
When everything came together. So guys, just so you know, the score was 85-35 to the Eldar. So
yeah,
have some faith. So I dropped the unit of Berserk, so there's no Berserkers in the list, 1 unit of Hearthkin Warriors, and the Grimnir for a unit of 10 Terminators with Warp Strike.
Yeah.
So it's got all 3 land fortresses, it's still got 3 units of bikes, and it's still got the 2 characters. And it's
pretty hard to chew through.
It's a double patrol. So the Warp Strike relic, if you get a high call, give them full rerolls, bounce the Terminators over.
Wait. Can you play the the laser beam faction, sub faction, and still get access to full rerolls?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
Oh man, okay,
S-
that's good.
You can
Yeah,
you
I
can
thought I thought you didn't have access to giving the Terminators full rerolls, but if
yeah.
you could do that too, ooh,
It's
that's nice.
the Volkite triggers mortal wounds on sixes to hit. So if you just
Hmm.
fish for sixes, a unit of 10 will get 9 mortal wounds on average in addition, like, and then all the damage that actually goes through. So
Yeah,
it's wild. On top of the
that's nice.
entire unit having a 12-inch no deep strike bubble, uh, it's pretty
Yep.
mad. And I think the correct play is to teleport them to a position which you're unlikely to be able to get to, create some firing lines in that area, and then the next turn, the High Call gives full rerolls to hit to a unit of Hutkin Pioneers and teleports
Mm.
himself over to the Terminators.
Well,
Uh,
you can teleport the high call as well.
Dave,
Yes.
you're finding everything out now. So the strat to teleport is called site to site teleportation, and
Of
it's
course, yeah.
1 CP for a character, 2 CP for a unit. But the warp
Mm.
strike relic makes it count as 0 once per game. It
Hmm.
can only be used once per game on each unit.
Yeah, I think what we've found out as well is that you don't need to be dumping 3 CP to deal 12 mortal wounds to a unit with your land
Hmm.
fortresses. Like, you can play the game on less CP, not have a Grimnir to give you more CP with a psychic spell, and you're still just going to massacre through everything. And in fact, armies that you would need to use the 3 CP for 16 mortal wounds against are naturally armies that you're going to decimate anyway. So that's you want to think about the matchups where you're going to be poor, which having 10 Terminators gives you a massive amount of diversity in play.
Absolutely. And I think the army is absolutely brutal. And I think people are going to work out optimizations on damage output very quickly. I don't want to give away too much because there's some obvious things which I've realized which I think some people are not talking about, but I'll spread it out over a number of podcasts because there is one thing going on now, which is that the community is starting to generally become uncomfortable with the concept of Votann entering this meta.
Mm,
I mean, there is still a large portion of the community that are making some arguments like, "Oh, why didn't we ban? Why are we banning this? Or why are we talking about this so negatively compared to Harlequins, Nids, Admech,
hmm.
Drukari?" But just because something was bad in the past doesn't mean that we have to allow everything bad in the future. It's just an immediate argument that I have to that.
Yep.
Um, and then
Well said.
yeah. And then, there was, there's a few more arguments which I get, which I don't really understand, but it is what it is. I think
Yeah.
the banning thing is quite interesting, and I haven't really talked to you about it yet, Dave. Like, what do you actually
Mhm.
think about this potential banning of Votan until they get a balance update?
I think it's fantastic. And I think actually in our team chat, the viewers obviously won't know. And I chatted to Zach, who runs the UKTC, the day of the book release, and I said, you should just ban this. Because I think the book is so strong that like, this is the way I see it, guys. You wake up in the morning, it's a beautiful day, the sun is shining on a bright blue backdrop, the grass is growing, it's long, it's flowing, the cows are mooing, it's just a beautiful day, the bees are buzzing and the birds are chirping. That's 40k meta right now. There's a couple of, sure, that it could do with a bit of mowing, or the hedges could use a bit of a trim. Sure, that's fine, but the meta is so good right now. And imagine that that's on a ship, right? And there's a big iceberg about a month out from where you're going to be sailing to, right? Everyone knows the iceberg is there, right? Everyone can see this iceberg. Some people don't believe the iceberg's there, but trust me, don't listen to them. The iceberg is there. And we know about icebergs now. We know that you don't run your ship into an iceberg. And that's what the Leagues of Votann essentially is, right? We've had enough experience with books coming out that are way too strong and start instantly dominating the meta. And the reason we've all realized that now is because we've had the last 4 books that have been written great. And we know that Games Workshop is capable of writing these balanced books that are flavorful, diverse, competitive. And that's the standard that we're holding them to now. So it's easier to look back now that we've already learned all these lessons and we've seen how things can be done differently. Now we say, okay, it's time to ban Votann because we understand that. Look, people are protective. I think people are generally protective of the meta, and I think the general sense in the community is that the meta is so good right now, and we've just been waiting for it to be competitive and balanced for so long that people are really worried about actually just a sledgehammer coming through. And then, in addition to that, what I am worried about is that the Leagues of Votann staggered model release will. I don't know if the army is. obviously it's not as strong if the models are staggered release, because the Hickerton Land Fortress is, if I recollect, the last one to be dropped, to be ordered or available, and that's the key linchpin to why the army is extremely powerful. So what I'm worried about is that it'll come out, people will point to Leagues of Votann and go, well, clearly it's not as broken as everyone thought, and then, oh, maybe we don't need to do anything about it, and then the Hickerton Land Fortress comes in and literally destroys everything. So I think banning is a really proactive way of the community letting Games Workshop know that this is not acceptable. And it's not that the community, like, if I was working at Games Workshop, I wouldn't take this as like hugely negative. Like, I understand there are business reasons for wanting to potentially make models much more powerful, and I work in a B2C business. I understand that, but I actually think that it affects the casual player of the game much more than it affects the high end competitive player, because the casual player evidently are those people that were trying to get into tournaments, and they make up the vast majority of the community. And I don't want to have people at your local games club saying, oh yeah, 40k, I don't want to play because the meta's crap, because Leagues of Votann are just so broken, or I don't want to go to a tournament because I'm just going to play against Leagues of Votann and get destroyed. And that's a genuine concern of mine. So I think, look, if there's a way that we could just keep the meta as is, and potentially a few nerfs to Tyranids and Necrons and maybe something else or whatever, then okay, that's fine. I think the game has still got so much depth to it that the meta can still keep evolving, even if it's really balanced. Just like take StarCraft Brood War, which I'm a huge fan of. The meta is still developing after 20, 25 years of gameplay. So yeah, I'm all for the banning, and I think we should come together as a community and really try and protect the great state of the game that we've got it in right now. All right, that was my rant.
Oh gosh, that was a beautiful rant. Oh, that's amazing. I mean, one thing I can't get my head around, Dave, and you have to help me with this, right? Leagues of Votann is an absolutely brand new army with a new set of models. There's going to be a large proportion of people, myself included, who likes the aesthetic, and I actually think the rules are quite cool. And I think they didn't have to make it broken to sell it. And they could have just made it a strong army, like make it like Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights. And I could put it down to incompetence, right? Oh, they've messed up. They've accidentally made the rules too strong because they haven't been able to see how the interactions come together. But there is no excuse for the points cost on the Hecatoon Land Fortress.
No excuse whatsoever.
The second you see that, you know that this is an obvious and conscious decision to break this army. And that's the point where I think when the community is slowly starting to realize that and get behind this idea that we can't just let Games Workshop have their own way with this. We are the customers who make up this game, and we have our say in, like, essentially making sure that the game is not extremely imbalanced. It affects casual players, competitive players, the entire community for the expense. It's at our expense for their profits.
Yep, and people vote with your wallet, just like you would any other product you want to buy, any other brand you want to buy, a TV or anything like that. Vote with your wallet. If it's going to impact the game negatively, don't go out and buy it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off mid.
No, you got it, man. You added to my rant.
Yeah, a bit of duo rantism.
I love it. Yeah.
So here's a good question. What is the correct points value for the Hickerton Land Fortress? I've got a number in mind. What is the correct point you would put it at with the 5 beams? So base 250 as is. What would you put it at?
I would put it with the beams. I would put it at 395 points.
395. I was going to say 375. So just to put that in comparison, guys, you're playing 3 Hickerton Land Fortresses, right? Let's just say, at a conservative estimate, 350, right? 100 points on top of the Land Fortress. Maybe some of the characters probably go up 25 points each. I think that would be very generous in terms of they should probably go up a lot more than that. Pioneers, maybe 5. So already you're playing with 300 plus points, what you already should. And then you're playing with characters, there's another 25 each, so you're probably taking 375 points plus. I'm just going to put this in comparison with Harlequins, where Void Weavers didn't go up. Off the top of my head, don't want to say that put the army up 375 points. Tyranids definitely didn't go up 375 points. In fact, my list that was running double Malicept went up 225. So this is a whole nother level of points that, you're effectively playing with 2,400 points equivalent, right?
Absolutely. 100%. It's way out.
It's not even close. Like, I mean, come on, guys, let's take it the piss.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's so obvious. It's a lot like in, I don't know if you know about this, Dave, but in AOS they released a model called Stormcast Dragons, and these dragons were new,
Ah,
gorgeous models. And Games Workshop released the codex and waited a month before releasing the models, a staggered release. And in the time between the release of the codex and the release of the models, Games Workshop released an FAQ saying, guys, we messed up. The points cost is too low on these models. This is the new points cost. And
mm,
I wish that GW would see what's happening and make an emergency FAQ on this codex, which will allow them to continue to get their sales on this thing.
yep.
Um, yeah.
And I think I'm actually somewhat optimistic. I'll be honest. I'm actually optimistic that they're going to listen this time,
Hmm.
because I think that all of a sudden tournaments banning it and the amount of community support around this idea of actually this is not the game that we want to play, I think is stronger than I think it's ever been. Like, people are so much more vocal about this than Tyranids, Void Weavers, and etc. Because that stuff got leaked like a week in advance or something, right?
Hmm.
So I think I'm a little bit optimistic. I think it's gonna. I think we'll come through all right, and I think there's plenty of money to be made. And I think the aesthetic of the army is really cool. I think they should have developed it to be a little bit more well-rounded. I think they could have had some different melee options, and they could have made some more models, perhaps, and maybe even made some more money. But yeah, I'm optimistic. So I think, guys, we'll leave it on that note. Leagues of Votann still broken, but you can beat them if you tailor your entire army. So if you want to go to Vik's tailoring shop, he's
Yep.
available
Yep.
at 127 Street. Get your suits and beat Votann.
Choose
That'll
your
be the episode.
mission, choose who goes
Yeah.
first, choose the time of the day when Dave is weakest, and you can beat Votan too.
I'm very underpowered in the morning. Oh, that's great. Look, everyone, if you've listened right to the end of the Fireside podcast, we just want to thank you guys for staying with us again. Vik and I have privately, we've said a lot of positive things about doing this. We're planning on doing a lot more content. We'll drop some content around our LGT as well. And yeah, also, if you like the new artwork, check that out. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, fucking smash that like button. I'm just joking. I don't know how to say that stuff. But yeah, well, look, we're really grateful to have you guys here, and that's my piece.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside podcast. Vik and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.